So lots of the women who are listening to the show in their 40s, obviously metabolism, body composition is a big concern. I mean, whether you're your 40s, your 20s, your 70s, I think that at some degree, we're always thinking about how can we be optimizing our metabolism? How can we be looking and feeling our best? Maybe we can talk a little bit about what an obesogen is
Mhm.
and how this can be directly influencing and affecting or indirectly affecting metabolism, propensity for fat storage, what kind of fat storage. So, talk to us a little bit about how maybe some of these environmental and immunogenic obesogens are making it harder to stay lean despite our best efforts and to stay fit and healthy.
It's a great question. By the way, I'm one of those women in the area of these, where things are changing. My body's changing. And despite all my regular routine and all my exercise and everything I'm doing, there's no question that things are changing hormonally for sure. And I think it's important to know that reducing exposures has a lot to do with a piece of the weight loss puzzle and or obesogenic components of our lives that not a lot of people are thinking about. So to your point about obesogens being a class, what it really was is it was a tease out of many of these chemicals that were found through research, through excellent studies, to show changes in a variety of ways to weight. And it was started in mouse studies. And what they were able to find, I say they, because I've listed tons of these studies in multiple stuff that I published, but it's all available for people to look up on PubMed and other places. But the idea was that not only do the chemicals that they put into this subclass of chemicals that are able to affect weight and metabolism, actually, was a variety of mechanisms. Again, they are not only known to obesogenic chemicals to increase the size of adipocytes, which are fat cells. They are also able to make stem cells, which come from our long bones, are the precursor cells to the whole body, turn them into adipocytes. So it actually can misdirect whether or not they turn into the, correct cells or not for the human body. They can also affect, actually, BPA is well known to do this, affect what's called adiponectin, which is also hormones that are affecting whether you store fat or not. And again, through affecting muscles and beta cells can affect whether or not we store glucose appropriately. So again, that plays into some of the changes that go with having insulin resistance. So there's, again, lots of different mechanisms that have been identified, and then these chemicals have been listed under obesogenic chemicals. They can still be immune system disruptors. They can still be hormonally disruptive, but they're very classically known. In fact, the most well-studied are obesogenic. And that includes things like vinclozolin, which is a chemical that's used to clean the bottom of boats that is very pervasive. It can include BPA as an obesogen, atrazine. A lot of pesticides have been identified as obesogenic chemicals, and they work on certain receptors called the PPAR gamma receptor, which turns on and turns off sort of this production of fat. So, the idea is that instead of, again, worrying about which chemicals are obesogens and which chemicals aren't, because BPA can do this, but BPA can also do that. Guess what the take home is? Let's try to reduce BPA so we don't sort of see these things develop or worsen. And where does that come from? Canned foods. We see lots of canned foods, if not all, lined with a plastic interior, classically known to have bisphenol A in it, not required to be changed out to any alternatives, by the way, and still in food packaging in the US for sure, and usually around the world because it's a late stage change that people might make. This includes organic, USDA organic foods. So food packaging is separate from the foods it carries or drinks it carries, but in fact, our largest dose of BPA comes from what we eat in terms of the food packaging. There's other areas, but studies that people reduce canned foods, there's a wonderful one I talk about in terms of reducing canned foods for lunch. They used Progresso soup, and they changed out, it was a Harvard study where they had 75 participants that changed out only their lunchtime soup or their meal they started off with either Progresso, which they used in the study, for lunch, and then they had a washout for 3 days, and then they had the same 75 participants only have fresh, no packaged soup for the next, I think it was 2 weeks or so. And they had an 1,100% reduction in BPA in their urine, which is where it's tested. So, it's doable. And everything I write about and recommend to high school students, college, even doctors programs that I'm teaching at is doable, practical, and not over the top for sure.
I think what frustrates me the most about BPA is that it's like this is part of the marketing now. It's like we're a BPA free bottle, but then I think you mentioned this a moment, in our just earlier in our conversation, where it's like they've swapped it out for BP, for I guess it would be BPF or BPS. These maybe far more toxic bisphenols that cause even more chronic inflammation and potentially have more of an obesogenic effect. So what would be I mean, obviously we can't all like there's some times when it's just I need water and it's I'm just gonna take the Evian or whatever it is. I'm gonna buy the $8 stupid priced thing because I'm dehydrated and I haven't planned. But what are some of the ways that we want to think about reducing what are some of the ways that we can reduce exposure to, so you mentioned canned foods, so maybe
Yeah.
not the canned soups and the canned peas and corn and things of that nature. What are some other ways that we can think about reducing our BPA or F or S
And lots of chemicals
exposure?
because, yeah. And to your point, so from a food packaging perspective, I really recommend people eating frozen USDA organic produce because, yeah, we grew up thinking, oh no, frozen's terrible for you. And that's really like, ugh, you weren't cared for as a child if you had frozen food. I mean, I can tap into all of the childhood trauma, but all I can tell you is like frozen USDA organic, number one, USDA organic, just to mention, is the only regulation in the US food system that has any value. I mean, for sure. It's not perfect, but it literally keeps thousands of fertilizer chemicals, pesticides, manufacturing chemicals out of the process of making that produce. From the soil quality, there's there's restrictions all the way through, not so much its packaging for sure, but certainly through its manufacturing. And, it's really important to understand USDA organic is really critical. Now, that being said, the argument that it's more expensive is really, in my opinion, not panning out. And I talk about this in the book, all the different strategies for people to think about. But frozen bags of USDA organic produce is available literally across the country in big box stores that reach
And cheap.
and
And it's cheap.
cheap and
It's cheap. Yeah.
accessible and
Yeah.
they last forever. And you just want to take all that food and put it into glass and stainless steel if you're going to heat it, right? We don't want to heat and microwave steamer bags and all that. But the idea that because big box stores like ShopRite and Wegmans, and we have a whole bunch of them, they know how lucrative it is to create their own USDA organic produce line, and they've done it. And so now you can go into some of the most remote parts of the country and get a hold of that produce. And you're not only going to get, by the way, another part of this conversation, which I certainly want to mention, is that nutritional value of food is this second big piece of helping to keep us healthy and remove chemicals, because it's not just taking away chemicals, it's also understanding how malnourished, I should say malnourished, that's an actual, how we have a deficiency of nutrients in our daily lives from the food quality we are getting in modern day times, from shipping, travel time, from packaging, from low refrigerator temperatures that they manage to do months before, apples go to Whole Foods, for instance. So the idea is that we want to do two things. We want to take away as many chemicals. Again, it's progress, not perfection. I can't tell you how much I need to tell people that. It's not about perfection. But you want to take away as many of those exposures as possible. And then you want to add in nutrition that's so valuable for the human body to not only live, but to thrive and to manage detox processes and all that. So it's kind of a twofold thing. And there's lots of different hacks. So frozen foods, certainly packaging when you're carrying your water. I can show you, I have my water bottle, which is, I have my tea and my coffee and my water when I travel. I love filtered water. Reverse osmosis is now so accessible in terms of the most aggressive way to clean drinking water. So I have, one at home under my kitchen sink. I have one here at the office. You don't necessarily have to buy a whole house filter, RO filter, because it's very costly. And I want people to use that money wisely.
I can't tell you the thing that chaps my ass the most when I go grocery shopping is I buy a pint of blackberries and the top, and I look at it before I buy it, and I'm like, this
Yeah.
one's perfect. And I take it home. I eat I'll eat the whole thing. I'll eat a whole pint in one sitting. And I take off the first layer, and then underneath it, it's
Yeah.
moldy. Like, I
Yeah.
cannot tell you how angry that makes me.
Yeah.
And I have never had that problem with frozen. Never, never,
For
never,
sure.
never.
And I don't have time to return. And I know exactly what you're saying because they're usually a little bit more expensive. If it's out of
Yep.
season, it's going to be more expensive. If you're buying seasonally, also, that's another way to ensure, fresher fruits. But again, fresh foods, produce that make their way to the supermarket may be organic and have less chemicals, but they're not necessarily more nutritionally rich.
Yeah.
And so if you've got farmers markets, I support local. I think it's a great way to go with your produce because it's picked that morning. If it's organic, even better. But it's interesting that frozens have really come to the top of my list as being the most win-win of every situation in terms of, low content of chemicals and high content of nutrition.
And I think in order for you to taste something that's cold, the taste actually needs to be more concentrated. So with the frozen fruits in particular, they actually wait to harvest the
Mm.
blueberries, the blackberries, the strawberries, the mangoes, whatever it is that you're buying frozen. They actually wait to harvest them later so that the plant has been able to give all of its nutrients to the
That's a
flower,
good
right?
point.
To the budding, the blueberry or the blackberry or whatever. So that by the time it's picked, it is like peak sweetness, right? So you can taste that when it's cold versus a blackberry. Maybe it's been hydroponically grown, or even if it's organic. Like sometimes we'll buy fresh fruit, and I'm like, I can't taste nothing. Like it's like I get this little bit of tartness, but the flavor is not bursting in my mouth in the same way that maybe frozen would. So I actually think, to your point around nutrient density, I think that there is something to be said around allowing the fruit to ripen until the last possible moment, because if
Mhm.
it's otherwise a frozen fruit, you can't taste anything because you need a little bit more of intensity of flavor when something's cold.
Oh, I took my kids to a local farmer's market where they volunteer, actually, and I don't think we've ever really wandered around and tasted a lot of food, but I brought over the organic. We happen to have an organic farm that sells at this farmer's market. We're in New Jersey here. And I had my boys taste strawberries that were just picked that morning. And I had them compare the kind that we pick up at the supermarket. We use Driscoll's or whatever as a very popular brand, but
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah,
not that
same,
many.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I had them taste the two strawberries, and it was like night and day. Now, mind you, we don't have time to always go to a farmer's market, but I wanted them to understand the difference just from their own palate. And it is pretty remarkable. But like you said, frozen packaging they flash freeze soon as it's picked and it goes to the store. So it's flashing all of that flavor, but also that nutrient into the produce.
The bisphenols, the other thing that you were saying, so frozen maybe is better in terms of food packaging. The other thing that I've noticed, not that I do this very often, but anytime that I have ordered from Uber Eats, a lot of times the food comes in it's almost like slippery, like the food is like kind of slipping around inside, like it's a cardboard packaging, but then it almost is lined with like a shiny, is that bisphenols as well, or is that something
So
else?
that's probably the perfluoralkyls, which are sort of the grease-proofing chemicals. That's the stuff
Oh,
that's
okay.
used on nonstick pans. It's the stuff that's Scotch guarded. That's the stuff that's on Gore-Tex, on, rainproof, waterproof gear.
Mm.
Food packaging actually had a big change. There was a big movement. I'm trying to remember when it was, but they are going to phase out PFAS chemicals out of food packaging and fast food
Because those
wrappers.
are forever. Like there's no half
Exactly.
life for them, right? Like they're
Well, yeah, there's no great half-life. Although I've done it. I mean, I take my own samples and I kind of use myself as sort of an experiment, so I don't have people spending tons of money to do it themselves. But I'll be honest, we can wash them out eventually over time. I mean, it's not like it lives forever in your body. Just, it tends to have a little bit more of a staying power, certainly in the environment, which means that it becomes pseudo-persistent. So if it's always in your water system and it's always in your air and it's always in your
yeah.
soil, it's going to always circulate into your body, whether your body breaks it down or not, fast or slow. So the goal is to really take your environments as best you can. Again, progress, not perfection, and do the best you can with your choices and with the things that are in your home and in your workplace as best you can, because that's where you're most exposed. It's not like traveling where you can't make those decisions. You don't have access to things you need. It's not like birthday parties that you're going to, that's kind of where I bring in, I'm sure you know, the 4 A's of environmental health navigation, which I talk about in the book, to give everyone an idea that this is not about perfection. The A is assess. The 50-question survey in the book, you want to know where you're starting from. You want really great questions to work off of, like, do you dry clean your clothes? Do you look up your personal care products for safety and toxicity? It's not to shame. It's to assess where you're starting from. The second A is avoid or swap. So reducing overall number of chemicals or products is actually a good way if you can do less is more. And then if you really want those products, there's lots of good ways to look them up. And I give all the resources to get safer versions of what you want to keep. The third A of these 4 A's of environmental health navigation is add. What do we need to add to the human body to help it thrive? That includes exercise and sweating to support detoxification, lymph nodes, and how we can keep our lymph, which is another clearance mechanism in the body, keep that healthy through movement, sauna, sleep, which is so critical to how we manage environmental exposures and detoxification processes. How do we add in nutrition, whether it's food alone or supplements that I talk about that are really important to get right for very many reasons. So the add is so critical as a part of this process. And then the allow, which is my fourth A, is hair coloring, right? It's my excuses for
It's my makeup.
It's my well, actually my makeup is swapped out. I mean, it's again, but to your point, yes, it's the things that I either won't change or can't change, and that's okay because those are the choices I've made. But and my kids play lacrosse, and I'm not going to take them away from something they love. I'm going to teach them how to manage their exposure by requiring them to shower with soap and water because these are petroleum-based chemicals that they're rolling around with. So there's lots of hacks that don't require costs. It's just more being aware and then understanding how to intervene. And that's the take home for those 4 A's.
My big allow, I'll tell you, my big allow is leggings. I have people telling me all the time, there's stuff in those leggings. I'm like, you know what? I'm sure there is. And the cuter I look in the gym is directly proportional to how good my gym workout is. So
For sure.
So I'm going to wear the leggings and maybe they have, I don't know, maybe it's PFAS. I don't even know what it is. Like there's a couple of people that have done.
You're talking about the PFAS. And to be honest with you, I feel like mine are so old and I probably don't want the new ones because they probably washed out all the chemicals after, 15 years of using the same damn leggings. But, listen, I think you have to decide what means something to you. And I don't think this is a race. It is a journey for everybody. And I say this because I've been on this journey for 16 years. And my first, exposure was through my dog getting sick and how I managed that tragedy 16 years ago with him being a young golden retriever, getting sick and exploring what he ate and drank and put on his skin, whatever. 16 years later, I am now in a position where I can tell people what works and what doesn't work, what to expect even symptoms from certain chemicals, but certainly not limited to. We have to be thinking holistically about every aspect of our lives, not just chemicals. We want to be thinking about how we live our lives and what we can tweak to make us feel better and prevent disease. That's the goal. It's progress.